Well, good evening, everybody, and I'm truly delighted to be here, and I suspect that you are too, because even if the world is a mess, that's a diplomatic term of art, and it is, Aspen is always beautiful, and the air is glorious, and we are surrounded by familiar faces, and two of those faces are on the stage now, and for what promises to be a really thought-provoking and stimulating discussion. My assignment is to introduce Congresswoman Jane Harman and Governor John Hickenlooper, but I have been given only 3 minutes to do so, meaning that I've already used my time, but luckily these distinguished leaders are very well known to the Aspen community, so the truth is that my assignment is totally superfluous. But allow me to say a few brief words about each of them because they are both truly good friends of mine. Jane is a retired member of Congress. She retired in 2011 after a 17-year tenure that saw her becoming a leading voice on foreign policy, defense, and intelligence issues. I did say to her many, many times that she should not retire because she was a voice of sanity and some insanity up there. She now serves as the president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, an institution that is very dear to my heart. I was at the Wilson Center during a period that I call the wilderness years, but other people refer to as the Reagan administration. It was a wonderful home for me and some other unemployed Democrats, and it was then, as now, an institution respected by foreign policy experts of all stripes. Under Jane's leadership, its reputation has only grown, and I'm truly pleased that an organization I so admire is in such good hands, truly, and I love coming anytime you ask me, Jane. Even when the Wilson Center served as my scholarly residence, there was another place that I considered my home, and that is Colorado. As some of you may know, my family came to Denver in 1949 after having fled Czechoslovakia. And Colorado was a place that we as my family found very welcoming. And I came to revere as, for all its frontier spirit. When I wear my Stetson and cowboy boots, they're real. And the openness that people had to new ideas and different kinds of people. We wanted to fit in very badly into Colorado. Not easy with my ethnic parents. My mother read palms at dinner parties. My father knew that he had to fish in order to fit in. The only problem was that he fished in a coat and tie. Governor Hickenlooper embodies the great Colorado spirit and the way, a geologist who found his way to a lot of rocks. And he got his start by opening the state's first brew pub in downtown Denver, and eventually made a leap to politics, having been elected the city's mayor in 2003, and in 2010 as governor of this great state. I got to know then governor, then mayor Hickenlooper at a time that we had the Democratic Convention in Denver, and he really was so unbelievably helpful, and we really learned so many things together. I was am chairman of the National Democratic Institute, and we bring an awful lot of foreigners to our convention, and we needed a lot of tickets, and somehow he extracted a lot of tickets. He has a reputation as a top-flight manager and a consensus builder and a master of compromise. In other words, he gets things done, and I know that Jane will certainly ask him a lot of questions about his amazing record in terms of gun control, capital punishment, disaster relief, and just somebody that truly understands what a state needs to do. Let me just he has also a terrific sense of humor. He sent me a Christmas present this year, and it frankly was an impossibly complicated puzzle, which I had on a table in my office where we only employ the brightest people. Nobody could figure out what to do with it. And this is really the best and brightest of Washington. And then I sent the governor back a card saying that we were completely puzzled. And a few months ago, to add insult to injury, he sent me a photo series showing his son Teddy completing the puzzle. he made it look very easy, and I took it as a sign that we in Washington need more of those Hickenlooper problem-solving skills. But in all seriousness, there is an awful lot that we can learn from Governor Hickenlooper, and I'm delighted. So since I know that it is a privilege to live in Colorado, and I live in Washington where we are not represented by a governor, let me ask my governor and Jane to tell us everything.
Well, hi, everybody. Good evening. Madeline, you left out two key little facts about my resume, which are, these are important. Number one, I'm a trustee of the Aspen Institute and very proud of it. And number two, I'm an Aspen homeowner, so I pay taxes in this wonderful state, and it is extremely well governed. You also don't know that I got the same puzzle for Christmas. It is on the coffee table of my house here, and I haven't even started it. I can't imagine how hard that must be. And one more Madeline story. Everyone knows how fabulous she is and all of her amazing careers and post-careers. She and I were in Kiev, Ukraine, during the election that elected Petro Poroshenko a year ago. And she's a rock star. People follow her everywhere, so I followed her everywhere, which meant I was a junior rock star. But the other thing about Madeline is she says she'll come to the Wilson Center anytime, and we did invite her a couple of months ago to kick off a reunion of some of the Wilson Center alumni. We've had 4,500 alumni, including Madeline, over 40 years. And it was a very well-attended thing, and Madeline came, and she was brilliant at breakfast. We had a little gig going, something like this. And she left. And then about half an hour later, some guy came up to me, and he said, how's Madeline? And I said, she's fabulous. And he said she had her gallbladder out or something similar 3 days ago. I mean, does anything stop you? All right, so turning to my dear friend, John Hickenlooper. We have, over recent years, become each other's plus ones. You need to understand this. I was his plus one a few years ago at I guess it was the governor's ball at the White House. He has been, talk about rock stars. He has been the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association and is now the outgoing chairman of the National Governors Association. And I guess he was hard up and needed somebody to come along, so he called. And I said, fine, and we went to the White House. And what was amusing about that is that so many of the governors are former members of Congress. So they were all my buddies, and I had to introduce him to all the good Republicans now running for president. And in return, he's been my plus one at a number of things, like the alfalfa dinner. But recently, Fred Malik, whom you all know, a part-time resident here, and the guy who raises more money for Republicans than anybody, invited me to his Republican governor's dinner. He has a few Democrats he invites. Madeline is one, Dianne Feinstein is the second, and I make it. I limp in as number 3. And so I invited John to be my plus one. And there he was in this sea of Republican governors. Did very well. So this is not a conversation about pot brownies. I know you're disappointed. And it's not even a conversation about his trek recently. 11 miles. Are we impressed? From Maroon Pass to where? Crested Butte. That was, yeah, see? Okay, how many of you have done that?
Oh my God, it's so good.
How many of you have done it 10 or more times? How many of you have done it 100 times? Ah, see? Okay, well, not so impressive. But the point of this conversation is to talk about one governor's view of U.S. foreign policy. Thought that would mix it up a little bit and introduce you to the views of a man who was thoughtful about this. He's out here to see all of you, and of course to see me and Bob Dickey and some of his buds, but also because the Aspen Strategy Group, of which Madeline and I are members, has a 4-day meeting to discuss countering violent extremism. Not a exactly friendly, fuzzy topic. very serious topic, very serious people, and John Hickenlooper's had his name tag on, sitting at the table with all the rest of us. And I think it's impressive that you came, and impressive that you're as intellectually curious as you are. So let's start with this. I came out here a few years ago at your invitation to participate in a 9/11 ceremony at the Performing Arts Center in Denver. Some of Denver's leading people host that, but you're the Grand Marshal, and you invited me and Joe Lieberman, both of whom had been in Congress on 9/11 and had reasonably senior roles in the policies after, to talk about it, and you were very involved in introducing it. Why does Colorado celebrate 9/11, and what does 9/11 mean to you and in your view, to your state?
Well, I think on a larger vision, first, I think 9/11, in addition to showing that the country is vulnerable on our turf, and in addition to bringing us all together, it drove home the fact, it really kind of catapulted this notion that we are all, whether we like it or not, engaged in foreign policy, and that the decisions and implementations that are made around the world can have a very clear consequence in our own home country. In Colorado, there's a number of people who really care about the threat of terrorism for various reasons. But Larry Meisel, Philip Anschutz, Charlie Gallagher, there's a bunch of them that really want to make sure that this state is a place where we recognize and understand the risks of terrorism and the risks that are associated with our place in the world. And at the same time, that those who lose their lives, first responders, military personnel, or innocent victims in 9/11, that they are remembered and celebrated. So we have every year on 9/11 had a rather large event, usually a couple of different events during the course of the day, where we bring in world experts to discuss different facets that maybe Coloradans might not be as easily exposed to. And it's been a great success. We always have a remarkable turnout, and it is, in Denver we don't have the Aspen Institute. I keep trying to convince Walter that this would be, that it really should have half its operations in Denver. So far, no traction. But it is. 9/11 has become a big part of that. Our obligation and responsibility to those who've lost their lives in our defense.
So let's move to Aurora, which could easily have been a terrorist attack. Instead, it was the attack of some nut who had easy access to guns. So I know the gun issue has been a big one in this state, and it was a huge one in your close reelection. And I just want to ask you about your view of guns at this point, and whether the regulation in the state is adequate, or what else we should do, the availability of guns. And related to that, you were telling me today that the sentence for the killer, the Aurora killer, is also controversial here, because he got a life sentence, he didn't get the death penalty, and that's been another issue you're involved with. So whatever comments you want to make on those things.
Well, the shooting in Aurora at that movie theater, and at least for those of us in Colorado, and I think in many parts of the country, we know exactly where we were when we first heard about it. When I got to the theater, and they had just finished doing the videotape of the crime scene, so everything is in place. The grains of popcorn haven't been moved. You have a visceral reaction to it that never, again, you never lose it. And certainly we, in a very strange way, it brought us together in the same way that any disaster or tragedy does. And we recognized, guns are a part of it. It's worth saying that the first thing we did was we put about $30 million a year towards mental health in this state, and that's it's the largest increase in mental health spending that the state's ever done. Put in 24/7 crisis centers at regional locations. We have a hotline. If someone's in trouble, they can call this number. A great deal of outreach. But we did see in that process some of the basic gun safety stuff that in the end, and when I talked to many of my Republican friends, as long as they weren't in elected office, universal background checks. And we ended up going back, and I've said this a bunch of times, but we looked back at the previous year in 2012, and we got to half the gun purchases, and didn't do any good, because a lot of my elected Republican friends said, well, crooks aren't stupid, they're not going to get a gun check. Well, in 2012, getting to half the gun purchases, there were 38 people convicted of homicide who tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. 133 people convicted of sexual assault, 620 burglars, 1,300 people convicted of felony assault, blah, blah, blah. You get, in case you think crooks really aren't stupid, 420 people, when they came to pick up their new gun, we arrested them for an outstanding warrant for a violent crime. So this seemed, as even though we were putting the main pulse into mental health and continue to do that, right? And continue to look at that. We also did universal background checks, and it did make for a somewhat dicey election, although I like to point out in a rough year, in the end, once they counted all the votes, we won by 3.5%. I'd say almost a landslide.
Hey, I won 3 elections with less than 50%, so I applaud you.
So, but anyway, I think that it could have been a terrorist act, and I think we've taken it. One of the amazing things on the evening of the shooting, we had first responders there in 11 minutes from when the first call came in. There's a shooting, we don't know. And when the ambulances, when they ran through the ambulances, police officers, against what their training was, took seriously wounded victims, put them in their cars, and took them to hospitals. So that of the 70 people shot, only 12 died. And if you talk to any doctor who was there and saw the severity of the wounds, it is a miracle, but also a real tribute to the training that first responders had, that the hospitals in the area were able to scale up in literally matters of minutes, not hours, but in minutes. And I think that training we've taken, it's all right, if we're going to talk about Ebola, we're going to talk about any other possible threat that could come very rapidly and unexpectedly, we've got this basic training. How do we go beyond that? And the last thing I'll throw, the mental health issue with children, we spend a fair amount of time, and as the Governors Association, we've talked a certain amount about why aren't governors more involved in foreign policy. And one, most of us have had some issues of mental health and shootings in our states. Certainly when you look at the fragility of teenagers and how easily they are drawn into this life of terrorism and self-sacrifice, mental health is an issue that it has to be a part of that conversation.
Well, let's go there in 1 minute. Do you have anything you want to say on the death penalty? If you don't, we can.
No, sure.
To that.
I mean, and I won't belabor it because it's, politically unpopular. My whole life, I was always for the death penalty, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Although Archbishop Chaput, who's left and now gone to Philadelphia, pointed out to me rather bluntly that that's not anywhere in the New Testament, and at least the New Testament is all about forgiveness. So he said, snap that out of your vocabulary. But I think when you look at it, I mean, it's about a $20 million for the cost of adjudication and then all the appeals over roughly 18 to 20 years is $20 million. It is no deterrent. There's no question about that. You're making 2-bit heroes. You're making celebrities out of 2-bit punks. And look at the number of copycat crimes we see. If you just give them life in prison without parole, and you don't go through all this rigmarole, and again, in Colorado, it's your zip code. It's where if you commit an atrocity in a big community that has the budget, then they'll try you for the death penalty and get all the appropriate retribution drama out there. But if you're anywhere else in the state, you just immediately go to life in prison without parole. So it's inherently unfair. So I try not to talk about it except when asked.
Well, this is not a guy who shies away from some of the tough ones. Well, let's go to foreign policy. I want to ask you about 3 different issues. First, the first is trade. The second is some of the controversial big issues in the news that you're obviously aware of. And the third is what a governor's role is in these things. Well, let's start with trade. You have been, since you were governor, I think to Israel twice, I know you've been to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, because I saw you there, and went to a breakfast with Denver leaders. That was impressive. And I think you've been elsewhere in Europe, and you have been to Mexico, and you're about to go to Turkey and some other, and to China. They're right on the way from each other. Is that the idea? But why do you make these trips? What's the value to California? That's my home state. What's the value to Colorado from these trade missions?
Well, I think that clearly jobs is the thing that almost every local elected official holds at one of their very highest priorities. I mean, public safety and making sure people have good jobs, or the opportunity for good jobs, are side by side. So going and building relationships and building bridges with other countries, you have already some foundations in place. I think it's a very productive use of an elected official's time. We also take a bunch of our business leaders and create new relationships and a sense of collaboration among them. So even though they're in some cases competing, they recognize that working together on certain things like trade missions helps everybody. It becomes a rising tide. The National Governors Association, which, as Jane said, I just stepped down as chair, we finally, a couple of years ago, right when I came in as vice chair, began funding a kind of a best practices group to help all governors be more effective at doing these international trade missions, because there's a difference between going over and just shaking a few hands and then going on to the next country. I think this trip we're going to Japan, China, Turkey, and then Israel. But you can get a lot, if you use best practices, you take the time to set up the best meetings you can get and make sure that you have the right people on your trip. It really does become a powerful lever to support your local business community and enhance their ability to expand their businesses and create jobs. And I think it's also, and Democrats have some trouble on this, but I can't be more outspoken in supporting the Export-Import Bank, the President's trade programs. This Trans-Pacific Partnership is a remarkable opportunity that I think will really expand our ability to create jobs, and good jobs. And I think a lot of them will be union jobs. I've had a number of discussions with certain friends in labor. They're not completely convinced yet. But I think those kinds of opportunities are significant.
Well, two comments about that. Democrats don't have a problem with the Ex-Im Bank. That one is a Republican problem. But on trade, Democrats do have a problem. I'm not one of them. I am proudly a pro-trade Democrat, and I agree with you that the opportunities far outweigh any downside, and that the goal is to make America more competitive, to provide new markets for American manufacturing, and if it all works right, high-tech manufacturing and the highest skilled jobs stay here or are rebuilt here, and the lower skilled jobs go overseas. So I think it's a win. But what's an example of something that happened in Colorado based on one of your trade missions? I think people would be interested, especially a small manufacturer, not necessarily in Denver or even in Aspen.
Sure, and one of the people we work with is the Export-Import Bank to try, and they are especially important, even though I think it's 70% of their total loans go to the large corporations, Boeing and General Electric. Part of the reason so many Republicans are against it, they think it's corporate welfare, which, just so we're completely clear, is nonsense. I guess I shouldn't say that. It's a little too strong. Let's say it doesn't. The facts don't bear it out. Every other country that we compete with has a similar bank, and all those companies when you're doing these kind of exports that the Export-Import Bank helps, those are American jobs. Most people, if you actually talk to the person on the street, they don't care whether it's a big company or a little company, as long as it's a good job. So anyway, we took a trip to Israel 2 years ago, and we have a number of young entrepreneurs that are active in water. Israel is I think, the leader in the world in terms of how to get every last drop of value.
That's right. They have a surplus of water in Israel.
It
the
is
only
remarkable.
Country that can say that. That's basically a desert climate.
Anyway, so we had one of our small businesses on that trip is involved in has a company that I think is going to grow very rapidly that looks at taking the impurities out of produced water out of oil wells. And Colorado has, especially out on what's called the Denver Basin, northeast of Denver, a lot of, or at least we used to have, a lot of oil and gas. That's a joke. No, we still have lots of activity, not quite as much as we did a year ago. But taking that water, which right now either has to be re-injected, which can possibly cause minor earthquakes, or leaving it out and letting it evaporate, what a better idea to find a cost-effective way by which you can maybe not make it potable, but get it to a level, a condition that can you can use it for livestock or for various agricultural uses. Anyway, I think this company would not be doing what it's doing without that trade. And there are many. Part of this is to help our companies, our businesses, get new ideas and new capital from Israel, but also to meet Israeli entrepreneurs. And they are probably the startup center of the world on a per capita basis. I don't think there's any question. And we took a bunch of our young entrepreneurs over there and made sure that they're going to be immersed and maybe form some partnerships. Because we may not have quite as many startups, but we're pretty darn good at implementing.
So let's take Israel and maybe a couple of other places on your world tour and talk about some foreign policy issues that involve Israel, China, Turkey, etc. Let's start with the Iran deal. Anybody heard of the Iran deal? At any rate, Israel is front and center right now. About 50 members of Congress are visiting Israel and talking to the prime minister, whose views are very well known about this deal, and trying to decide how they will vote, whether they'll vote to disapprove. That's how it comes up. You don't vote to approve the agreement that the Obama administration has made. Do you have a view on the Iran deal, and do you think governors should have views on issues like this?
I think governors should have views. I think we should be careful how we articulate them, especially when we're overseas, because sometimes our words carry more weight than we would otherwise be aware. That's part of the reason the National Governors Association is kind of getting together and doing this best practices approach, because it makes it easier for us to interface successfully with the Department of State in Washington, so that we are working in concert with them. I think, and I thought I had a position on the Iran deal until I got here. And then in 24 hours here, you hear every single different argument for and against. And all the smartest people, not all of them, many of the smartest people said, well, I'm just going to wait a little while longer till I really decide. So I think that's a good position.
Yeah.
I am most sympathetic. It clearly has all kinds of problems, and they've been well discussed in the media. And there are all kinds of challenges just, freeing up this money that can be used for mischief, not just in the Middle East, but even beyond that sphere. But I think that, again and again, what came up in the conversations yesterday and today were if you don't have this, it may be the least best or the least worst solution, and that if you don't have it, you lose whatever benefits. You lose a lot of the sanctions that were in place are going to go away anyway, and you lose those benefits that go forward. I think a valid question to be asked is if in 10, or 12 years, or 15 years, when this agreement has gone through its life, and suddenly Iran decides they are going to go out and go after a nuclear weapon, is the United States prepared to say, we will not let you do that? And I think that were the president to step up and say, we will not let you, down that road, we will not let that happen, it would certainly make it a lot easier for many people to come out and support it more publicly.
Well, it's a tough decision for members of Congress. I am no longer there, as you know. I did escape from the asylum voluntarily. But I've just put out there that President Obama has said that. He has said he will not let Iran get a bomb. And in thinking about it, I know the arguments, there are people in our group who go both ways on it, but my own view is that we are in a post-deal phase, and you either support this deal or no deal. And I think no deal is a much worse outcome in the short and medium term. And I also think we're not giving up the military option. I think if Iran cheats and this so-called snapback, this ability to go to the UN to get the sanctions reintroduced, fails, I don't think this president, and I certainly don't think that the next president of either party would hesitate to use the military option.
Well, it's also, I think, the value of American influence. And I can't remember who this morning was talking about that your influence in the world is dependent upon, how, it's magnified by how many times you're successful, and it's diluted and diminished by how many times you don't succeed. And I am a firm believer that without American leadership, there is no strong leadership on the global stage, and that this is an opportunity for the United States. We've built this relationship with the other leading economies in the world, and they strongly support this agreement. It's a golden opportunity to kind of reassert American leadership.
Well, our own Madeleine Albright says America is the indispensable nation. She's right, and by that she doesn't mean we are indispensable by ourselves. We should act with others. But our influence, I surely agree, will be diminished if Congress ends up rejecting the deal and overriding the president's veto, which I don't personally think will happen. But let's turn to some other foreign policy subjects. You were just raising, it's also a domestic subject, but countering violent extremism, which we've been looking at for the last several days. A number of Americans have been recruited, I'm sure some from Colorado, to join the great fight for the Islamic Caliphate in the Middle East. And we have had a long discussion about a counter-narrative, how to project a positive sense of American influence, what we can do about the humanitarian crisis with half of Syria being displaced. I mean, it is truly horrendous to think about all this. But what are your views on this as they affect Colorado? What is Colorado trying to do in the neighborhoods where people are susceptible to be radicalized? And these are mostly teenagers. What are some of the lessons that you have learned from other issues that you are applying here or that you will apply now that you've been through this brilliant exercise at the Aspen Institute?
And it is a brilliant exercise, and again, I want to thank the Aspen Institute and Walter Isaacson and the entire team. It is to get this much horsepower in one place, and to sit there. I thought yesterday, I came away from yesterday after spending 2 hours listening, and I could not remember a time where I had a steeper learning curve. And certainly in public life, I've had many steep learning curves, but nothing at that level in an afternoon. I'm a big 20 years or almost 20 years in the restaurant and brew pub business. I'm a great believer in branding, and that matters. And obviously, we've got a long way to go in terms of how the internet is being used in recruiting these, in many cases, kids. Not always kids, but in many cases, kids. And when you Google on ISIS or a lot of these, and you're seeing beheadings and you're seeing their propaganda. I'm amazed that we aren't further along, and I recognize that a lot of very smart people are working very hard on this, and that there aren't easy solutions. But if if I even mention that I might want to vote for somebody, if I mention in dinner conversation in a restaurant, somehow when I go home that night and I'm on my phone, all of a sudden an ad for that person somehow mysteriously pops up on my screen. It seems like we have figured out how to populate those images based on who we are and what our inclinations are in an incredibly powerful way, and yet somehow we're not able to populate that. And yet there was a discussion earlier today where they talked about how so many of the platforms are just being overrun with the propaganda of these extremists and terrorists, and that the normal people that used to use that particular platform, whatever it was, for their own purposes, for their business or for their relationships with their community, they don't even go there anymore, and it becomes, and this happens again and again, it becomes just part of the soil by which extremism grows.
Well, I agree, and we should be able to find effective ways to push back. That's been part of the discussion. Denver is an IT hub, thanks in part to the heroic efforts of its former mayor. And there are a lot of companies, some of you are sitting right here, who could play a bigger role, and should, because think about it. If these kids, wherever they come from, either self-radicalize or through this access to horrible propaganda about how to make bombs and et cetera, cause damage in your communities, you get hurt too, and your kids get hurt too. And oh, by the way, they could be your kids. So there's an urgency here to get in the game and figure out some better solutions. And they're not going to be, I don't think, top-down government solutions. They're going to be bottom-up community solutions. And it is really important to get going here with this. Well, let's just talk about a couple more foreign policy issues and then open this to questions.
Can we, because you touched on cyber.
That's where I was going.
You were way ahead.
I was going to ask you about cyber. Congress, as usual, has missed an opportunity to pass a strong cyber legislation. The view is that there really need to be better tools in the federal government to help the private sector, which owns 85% of our computer capacity, know when there is an attempted attack and respond in an effective way. We're doing a better job of protecting the military space, the so-called .mil space, and the government space, .gov, but .com, what all of you and I use most of the time, is very vulnerable. So what is Colorado doing about cyber?
So on the state level, when I came in, I think we were spending a couple $100,000 a year, and now we're up into many millions of dollars a year. I think we're close to $10 million a year. And the woman who I hired, who I brought on to be our Chief Information Officer, Secretary
Good
of
call
Technology.
hiring a woman for that job.
Yes, her name is Kristen Russell, and she stayed the first 4 years. But she'd been the Senior Vice President of Global IT Services for Oracle. And she was going to switch jobs, and we convinced her. Actually, I read her a poem. It's a long story, which I'll save you. But convinced her that 4 years of giving back and that she could make a huge impact. And she was on the job no more than 2 weeks when she said, "I cannot believe the level of security that your data is at." So I feel pretty comfortable. We're probably one of the leading states now in terms of really spending the money and enhancing that security. But we have a long way to go, and that's, I think, true everywhere in the public domain, the public sector. We were talking earlier about Jane Hall Lute and the Council on Cybersecurity. That's a nonprofit out of Washington that is they want to make sure that best practices and assessments are done in real time by the right people. It's a great resource that again, Council on Cybersecurity, because they work not just for government, but they work for business as well. And I think it's a community or communal challenge that we have to take on. Colorado's lucky. We have, of the largest cyber technology companies, several of them are in Colorado. So I get to go to them and say, how can I help you grow? I need help. It's kind of a give and take. The help I'm asking for, I try to get as much of it as free as possible, just because of the taxpayer nature of this
He's
state.
saving your money, folks. Everybody gets to go to his brew pubs for free following
My
this
brew pubs
event.
were all sold in 2008, so I
know.
have no
Well, I went to one,
cross-interest.
a former one. They're still great. Just two more questions. One about climate change and one about Congress. Climate change. Right after I spoke in Denver on 9/11, the epic floods hit Colorado. You were on crutches. You just had a hip operation, and I felt so sorry for you limping around. But obviously, climate change is affecting Colorado. The President Obama, has been using his executive authority, I know that's controversial, but to come out with stronger and stronger regulations. One just last week, I think, on regulating coal power plants. What's your view of that, and what do you think Colorado can or should do in addition to whatever it's doing on climate change?
Well, I think the conflict over climate change, is it happening? Is it not? How much are human activities the root of the problem? We try to go beyond that, or just not worry about that. We're at a high altitude. We know that we always want cleaner air, and we certainly recognize that there's risk associated with increasing carbon emissions. And so whether those carbon emissions come from coal, and we passed the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act several years ago that is going to convert several coal plants to natural gas. We did methane regulation, the first state where we got the national, couple of the largest national environmental groups and then a couple of the largest oil companies, locked them in the same room for 8 months and got them to agree on, no red tape. Every dollar spent actually makes the air cleaner, but both sides could say this is a clear victory. I mean, I think those things just make basic sense. And I think we are looking at the 111D, this notion that we can have a state climate plan, and we're going to do it, even if the courts were to throw out what saying the president didn't have the authority. I'm not a lawyer, but we've got a couple pretty good lawyers, and they think that's unlikely to happen. But even if it did, we're going to work to make our air cleaner and find ways to do that cost effectively. I think I'm the only governor in the history of America that was a professional geologist, and I've had, I can't remember how long ago it was, but I did get a master's in geology way back when. Horizontal drilling and the advent of inexpensive natural gas is not going to go away. So we have this unique opportunity where it really doesn't cost us a lot. In many cases, if you're talking about a new plant, natural gas is significantly and will continue to be significantly less expensive than the cheapest coal you can produce. And I think we have an obligation to go to those communities that have a lot of coal miners that are going to get displaced and try to figure out how do we retrain them, what's that economy going to look like. But long term, we're going to move towards cleaner production of energy and on that route to fully a renewable at some probably more further away than most of us would like, but a fully renewable energy portfolio. But in the meantime, natural gas allows us to do that and comply with all of 111D. I don't think it will be financially. I think we will be net neutral when we finish this plan.
So my last question, and then we'll go to all of you, is on, it's really not on Congress, but it tees off about Congress. I think, having been there for as long as I was, 9 terms, I think the business model of Congress is broken. The game now is to blame the other side for not solving problems rather than work with the other side, and both sides do this. The sadness is, number one, we have urgent problems, and number two, there are very smart people, some, in each party in Congress who, if the environment permitted, would work together. That is not the model that governors have. Governors, certainly this wonderful governor in this state, but others too, are able to work on a bipartisan basis to solve state problems. So my question is, who are some other governors currently serving that you admire in other states?
Oh, sure. And the nice thing about governors is it makes it sound like it's one of the few nice things about governors. I didn't mean it that way. But governors get along, and most of us end up having to make tough decisions and take stands on things that are unpopular and work our way through it. And there are some remarkably talented Democrat governors and Republican governors, and we're actually in the process of hiring a new CEO for the National Governors Association, if any of you out there are interested in a second career. But I think the right entrepreneurial person coming into that organization, we should be the model that helps change the culture of Congress. Because we had our summer meeting a couple weeks ago, and we hammered out a pretty strong agreement with 24 out of the 25 governors that were there signing on an immigration. How are we going to look at immigration and all the side effects of that? We got 24 out of 25 governors to sign it. I think governors can be able to do that. And Bill Haslam, who's the governor of Tennessee, very remarkable, moderate, pragmatic, someone who makes compromise. Governor Herbert's another Republican at the governor of Utah, perhaps more conservative, but still very pragmatic. He and I agree on, I would guess, 90 or 95% of the stuff. Terry McAuliffe, who's the new governor of Virginia, who I'd always thought of just as kind of a political fundraiser, turns out to be, I think, a very talented manager and a great leader in his state, and has, remarkably rapidly come back from a tough campaign with high approval ratings and really getting things done in a purple state. Again, it's not the one thing that is noticeable, especially right now, of the new crop of governors that came in 2014. 10 of the 11 are either entrepreneurs or who manage large companies. So Governor Ricketts in Nebraska was a CEO for TD Ameritrade. The governor of Arizona founded and built up Cold Stone Creamery. And it's interesting. I'm a huge believer we need more business people, more business experience in government. And I think we have a whole program in Denver called the Leadership Initiative. We're trying to figure out how to fund that and take it nationally. But that possibility of taking, serious people that know how to run large enterprises and get them to come into government, either run for office, executive office, or come in and run a cabinet agency at a state level or a national level. I think it's full of opportunity. And with this set of governors coming in, there are so many entrepreneurs and managers, I think we're suddenly making dramatic headway.
So let's go to your questions, starting with Zoe Baird. I know she has a question. She's right here. And then raise your hands again.
I didn't
We'll
see
go
Zoe's
back
hand
there.
go up.
We'll go to Stuart Bernstein. Of course, how would I miss him? We'll go to the way in the back in a white jacket. We'll go to you, and then we'll come over here. Zoe, let's ask brief questions, unlike
I
me.
didn't see my hand go
and
up
we'll
either,
get brief
but
answers.
I'm delighted to ask a question on behalf of myself and Madeleine Albright. Madeleine Albright says that the single most important foreign policy problem at the moment, if I could paraphrase you, is the need to rebuild the middle class at home. And I wonder if you could talk about whether you share that view or what your views are on how to rebuild the middle class at home.
I can't think of, off the top of my head, I'm sure there's something somewhere, I can't think of anything that Madeleine Albright's ever said to me that I didn't say, yeah, I agree with that. Or, well, I didn't think that before, but let me think about that. So obviously I'm not going to, I agree completely. I think it's a big issue, and it's there's a couple of studies that came out that looked at people's expectations in different countries all across the world. And this was in a book called The Coming Jobs War. I forget, Jim, come on, somebody out there knows the guy. Anyway, it's the bright light. For the first time in history, 7 years ago, every single country, the number one concern they have, before they would say it was food, it was water, it was shelter, whatever, every single country primary concern was jobs. And not just any job, but jobs that have benefits, that you get paid over the table instead of under the table. And in most places, that is the pipeline into middle-class jobs. And middle-class jobs, in terms of how governors are looking at it all over the country, and I think we're all very similar, a lot of it's workforce. And how do we do a better job of making sure our kids, as they come through school, and I mean that from birth all the way through however far they get in college, that they are not only educated as good citizens, but they're ready to get a job. And I'll give you a plug, even though you weren't angling for it.
No, she doesn't want a plug.
The Markle Foundation is working, and we are one of the states working on it, of trying to use technology and some of these, how do you do experiential learning, apprenticeships, and not just looking at degrees, 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, but looking at badges and certificates, all these different corporations that have different training programs, and when you finish that training program, you've learned something. Well, there's no place to keep a record of all that progress that someone makes throughout their career. You have our 19th century or early 20th century version is a VTI, but in this age, I think what the Markle Foundation envisions is a LinkedIn or some technology that allows a record and an interface between where people learn things, and it could be at a company, could be at Google, or it could be at Starbucks, or it could be at Walmart on how to do all kinds of whether it's community customer service or whether it's how to do inventory management. But take those discrete packets of learning and create badges or certificates so that someone, as they go up forward in their life, can go from place to place or job to job and have a much more seamless way to assess their own training and what they need to do to get the next job. And I think that's the kind of thing that's going to help rapidly expand the middle class.
Stuart Bernstein.
Thank you. Two Democrats that I admire the most are sitting up on that stand. By the way, you look like a governor. You look like a Democrat. I'm a Republican. You talk like a Republican. How did you become a Democrat? And would you mind sharing with us a little bit how the marijuana situation has worked in your state?
Foreign policy.
I'll be brief. Well,
Yeah.
let me just say that the marijuana stuff has come up repeatedly. When I'm in Mexico, we do the Biennial of the Americas every other year in Denver, which is a chance to reach out to Canada and Mexico and South America, Central America, and they are intensely interested in the marijuana, obviously because they have so many of the unintended consequences. Back to being a Democrat, all my grandparents were Republicans, all my aunts and uncles were Republicans, but my mother was widowed twice. She thought government should be smaller, but it had to work. And she became a Democrat, and she raised 4 Democrats. I would also say I can handle my crazies probably better than I can handle your crazies. Another way to look at it. Wait. Let me just finish the marijuana thing, and I can do it in 30 seconds. You know, if I could have, after I opposed it, I hated the old system. The war on drugs was a disaster. But you don't want to do it on a it's very hard to do something like that on a state-by-state basis. It takes a tremendous amount of time and energy to create a regulatory framework from scratch. And if I could have, the day after the election 3 years ago, I would have waved my magic wand and had the vote go the other way, and we wouldn't have had to worry about it. But now, after 3 years and a bunch of really smart people, I think making great progress on a lot of the challenges. Again, I'm not sure. When other governors ask me, I say I'd wait a couple of years to see whether we can solve some of these, some of the issues around edibles. Obviously, banking is still a problem. But I wouldn't, if I had that magic wand today, I'm not sure I would wave it and go back to the old way. I think we've made enough progress that now the risk reward would suggest that we accept some risk and go forward and really try and make this solution work.
But I asked you last night what you say to your Teddy, who is now 13, 14?
13.
13. What do you tell Teddy?
And I tell Teddy, what I tell every kid, is that the high THC marijuana, 10 times more intense of what any of us ever smoked when we were kids. Not that anybody in here did smoke marijuana. I'm very clear, and I understand
Certainly
that.
we didn't inhale.
I understand that. But it is every neuroscientist I've talked to, and I've talked to many, and there's not a longitudinal study that absolutely can prove this yet, but there will be, that they are convinced that high THC marijuana, when your brain is still rapidly growing, so when you're a teenager for sure, it has a very high probability of permanently reducing your long-term memory, which for most of us is it's your IQ, right? It's how well you can access your memory and get that information out is a big part of how smart you are. So I tell Teddy, under no circumstances, and I make sure that he understands the facts for it, because I know, not yet, but any day now, he's going to do the opposite of whatever I tell him. So I'm trying to make sure he has real facts, and we're going to spend, in Colorado, we started last year with $2.5 million. We will spend $6 million this year with some of the top marketing people in the country on how to convince teenagers and adolescents that this is a bad idea for them.
Okay, in the back, in the white coat, and let me say we'll take, because since we're running over time a little bit, that'll be the third question over here. We'll take 3 here, but we'll group them in 2s. So you'll ask your question. Who wants to ask questions here? In the middle over there, and you'll ask the second question, and then we'll take 2 more people over here. Okay.
Governor, Congressman, my name is Chris Gates, and thank you so much for your public service. You're heroes in all of our books. My question has to do with areas where you're not sure, like where you see the use of your leadership is to keep the inquiry open and the conversation unfolding rather than pressing for an answer, and perhaps even something you've changed your mind about.
Whoa. In the middle over here? You had it. Wait, don't answer. Wait, we're going to do 2, and then 2 more. Yeah, because we are.
I'd like to talk. I'd like
in the
to-
middle.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
to
Do
hear
you have the
governor
microphone?
talk about the work that he's done with teenage pregnancies. I think that work that I've read about is something every state should be doing and will help a lot to deal with the middle-income people, because it'll dramatically improve education.
Okay.
So the first question, in terms of what do you do when you're not sure, which unfortunately happens too frequently, and we can both answer this. I think the key is just to keep working at it. And I understand complex problems best by talking about them, and I will literally talk to anybody that I can get a hold of and continue trying to distill down what are the real facts, and then how does that connect with my core values, emotionally, what I most deeply believe in. And generally, I can get to a place. This whole issue on the death penalty took 9 months of, we would meet twice a week on it just because I was so troubled by it. And just a lot of times, especially with complex issues, it just takes that amount of time to give relative weight to the different facts, because not all facts are created equal.
And did you want to answer the second
Yes.
one?
So Walter's question on I think it's public now, so I can say it. For several years, it was anonymous, but the Susan Buffett Foundation funded us to the tune of over $25 million over almost 5 years to provide, and we were very careful to have this protocol. So throughout all the clinics that the state has access or could work with throughout the state, so it started with 29 clinics, it ended up, I think, over 60 clinics, offering young women, so 15 to 25-year-old women who did not have financial means, and this is always after starting, we talked about abstinence. If you're a teenager, you shouldn't be having sex. It's not a good idea. But then we'd say, don't compound one mistake with a second mistake. And we offered them long-acting, reversible contraception, which they call LARC, long-acting, reversible contraception. And from the second year, we could see the results beginning to trend. And after 4.5 years, we were all amazed. We reduced teenage pregnancy by 42%. We reduced teenage abortion by 35%. I mean, the cost benefit on this is staggering to just think of how much money is avoided by making sure that young women start a family when they want to and when they're prepared to. And I think you're exactly right. It's a big part of giving people, individuals, but especially young women, the real chance to finish school, get some training, and have an opportunity to join the middle class.
Well, good for you. Let me just add an answer to that really interesting question about what if you don't know. My addition to that is, what if you were wrong? What do you do? It's certainly in Congress, in addition to the fact that the place is broken, there's very little opportunity to learn. It is a difficult thing. It's enormously busy, and if you have a district across the country and you're flying around, it's hard. And sometimes you act on incomplete information. But one time when I really made an effort to read everything, and I was on the House Intelligence Committee, so I read all of the intelligence leading up to the vote on the Iraq War, which clearly demonstrated, the intelligence did, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So I voted for the war, and then of course it turned out that he didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and then it also turned out that some of the decisions we made to prosecute that war were, in my view, in hindsight, most of them were not voted on by Congress, but wrong. And looking back on that, after all these years, you can see how that effort, certainly the initial part of that effort, created many of the calamities we now face in the Middle East. So what do you do if you were wrong? Well, for starters, you admit you're wrong, and then hopefully you learn from it. But it's a tough situation to try to offer leadership in an environment that's very fast-moving and chaotic, like the Congress. And I regret that vote sincerely, and I anguish about it.
Applause. I want to throw in a more lighthearted aside. So, never having been in public office, when I first became elected mayor, and the city of Denver has amazing holiday lights, and it says "Merry Christmas, Season's Greetings," and they were going to replace the signs. And I'd been in office for 3 or 4 months, and I said, well, this is, a lot of my Jewish friends will appreciate the fact that we just say Happy Holidays, Season's Greetings, and won't put the Merry Christmas back up. And everyone, no one said anything. And Michael Bennett was my chief of staff, and a phone call came in from the Denver Post reporter. Somebody in our public works department had leaked that this travesty this outrage was going to occur. And so I got a phone call saying, is it true? And I said, sure, no problem. It's not going to cost a penny. No tax dollars. We're going to replace them anyway. Next day, front page, Hickenlooper pulls down Merry Christmas. Talk radio, the most outrageous thing ever to happen in the history of Denver. And I sat with Cole Finnegan, who was my city attorney and brilliant, Michael Bennett. I would argue, I'm not making a political pitch here, he's not in re-election yet, but one of the 2 or 3 best U.S. senators in America right now. And both of them said, you're the mayor now. It's not easy to say you're wrong because part of the power of your office depends upon you, not diluting it by making mistakes publicly. And I just couldn't get my arms around that. We were just unleashing our plan to end homelessness. We had a bunch of stuff that really mattered, and I could just see this going on. So I just picked up the phone, called up Peter Boyles, the most venomous talk radio person, and I said, we made a mistake. We're going to put Merry Christmas up there just as big as it ever was. And he went, what? You're going to what? And I said, yeah, we're going to put it up just because there are 2 O's in Hickenlooper doesn't make me Scrooge. We're going to go ahead and rebuild the way it was.
All right.
And I had to call. I had a whole list of good Jewish friends who I had to call up and explain. And to a person, every one of them understood the relative importance of something like that when you're trying to get off to a good foot. But it did, in terms of all those people listening to radio, what our voters, one of the reasons they hate or are so disenchanted with government now is that no one ever does admit they're wrong. And no one says, well, here are the facts, but I really thought this, and I screwed up. And if you do that once in a while.
Quick questions, one in the back, in the middle, and I thought there was, where's a woman? Is there a woman who'd like to ask a question? Can't see you. No. Unless I've missed you. Over there. That's the second question.
Speaking of things
I
that
just want to be fair here.
Speaking of things that matter.
Excuse me.
Are we done? I think you are. Speaking of things that matter, I'd like to know more about what you're doing for veterans, and specifically, I know for a fact out here that there are counties. Eagle would be a great example, that do not have a full-time veteran services officer. There's a woman in Eagle who works 8 hours a week to service every veteran in Eagle County. And they blame that on the state. They say the state doesn't fund veteran services officers. And they are just the beginning of what's needed, obviously. American Legion is losing its influence, Veterans of Foreign War. What are you doing in your administration? I want to also add that I voted for you, so I mean this as a friendly question, but what are you doing for veterans?
Thank you. And the final question is on the side there, right there. Yeah.
General Petraeus said that the lack of universal background checks is a homeland security issue. If it can be phrased in that sense and brought to Congress, I mean, how could anyone oppose it?
I wish he would have said that to me before the re-election. I could have used that. That's a very useful phrase for someone who was in my position. But I think you're exactly right. Couldn't disagree with that at all. In terms of the veterans, and I will, those positions aren't paid by the state. They're paid by the part of the federal government gives us a chunk of money to use for veterans. The agents that are in throughout the state are definitely not as many as we'd want, and I think that one way to look at it is to say, all right, well, at least we have double the number that we had, whatever it was 6 years ago or 8 years ago. But the challenges, I mean, the level of understanding we now have around PTSD, the returning veterans right now coming back. It's my ex-wife, so I'm not making a plug. But my former wife, Helen Thorpe, wrote a book called Soldier Girls, where she followed 3 young women from Indiana who joined the National Guard. One was, I think, 19, one was 29, I think one was 40, for to get money for school, whatever reason, and all from very low-income backgrounds. And they all ended up, after 9/11, going to war. And the book just examines what they came back with and how ill-prepared our veteran system is for women. It is staggering. The gap that exists for getting services, not just to the individuals you're talking about, but to make sure all our veterans get that. We're now, I think, very successful, not perfect, but in terms of making sure returning veterans, if they want a job, we put them at the top of every list for state jobs. We have programs in the oil and gas industry, construction industry, aerospace, where special training programs, so even before they're discharged, we have them go through a 14-week training, so while they're still getting paid by the government, on basic how to use a computer screen in aerospace to do kind of a basic entry-level job at Lockheed Martin. And we're close. I think within the next year or two, we'll be pretty close to having, in terms of recently returning veterans, darn close to zero unemployment if we're not there already. And we're trying to take that to all veterans and just saying even no matter what with chronic homelessness, obviously veterans are a high percentage of that. We did not treat people from the Vietnam War coming back in any, the stories I hear are blood chilling of how people turned away from them, and many of them ended up with drinking and lifetimes of addiction. We are one by one, person by person, trying to make sure that we get them into housing, supportive services, medication if they need them, but most importantly, getting them into jobs because they especially need that social framework of people that will care about them and help and support them.
Well, the highest population of homeless vets from Vietnam is on the beaches of Los Angeles, where I live, and I see them every day. And it's very good news that Colorado can fix this problem a lot better than the United States Congress can. Please thank two Colorado heroes, Madeleine Albright and John Hickenlooper.
And Jane Harman. Jane, John, thank you very much. The Colorado Mountain College Isaacson School for New Media is hosting a reception. Please stay and join us, have some informal conversation with your peers and with our speakers. We'd love to have you step out and stick around for a while and enjoy such a beautiful night. Thank you. And thanks to both of you.